Welcome to this week's VIN-dow podcast. This week, Robert Hollinshead talks about the definition of a cheap car.
Okay, welcome to this week's VIN-dow with Robert Hollinshead. Bob, I think today we're going to be talking about cheap cars.
Yeah, I like that, Sean. Cheap cars, right? The definition of a cheap car, right? So if we happen to be in the middle of, I would say, the most insane wholesale market that nobody's been alive to see anything similar to this. We almost saw it last year coming out of the initial crash of COVID. And, you know, we rode through June, July, August, September, whatever, in a world where Happy to Clown could go buy anything on four wheels and make a dramatic wholesale profit, right? So anybody knows that. In other words, you couldn't retail a car for enough money because they bring more money in an open, aggregated, legitimate marketplace, right? So that happens to be now historical fact. It's no longer something that couldn't have happened. And, when you look backwards, that must have been misreading data or whatever. No, as players, we actually understand that no matter what you did, it's physically impossible to make a mistake, right? And that was a once in a, that was the 400-year storm that will never occur again, except it's not. So now we're actually sitting for other reasons, chips and schmitz and whatever, can't do this and can't do that, right? Okay. Now we're sitting on the cusp of, and actually not on the cusp, but actually in the abyss of the let's call it the second round of insane hyper value of, and it's cross-sectional, it's exotic, it's truck, it's luxury, it's midsize, it's economy, it's slop. In other words, it's slop. It's a marginalized car with like a challenged history. It could even be challenged mileage in most regards, right? It kind of like echoes back to where we had an 8 or 10 year period, maybe more, of export. Caprice is export. The LTS, that's an export. Previa is going to China. It's export. Yeah. And therefore, irrational prices on cars that didn't make no sense. You walk into a Lexus dealer, you buy Auto-Trades, you're paying $2,000 too much for one with low miles because you're getting the one with 180,000 miles that makes 7,500, makes up everything on the other ones that you overpay for. Therefore, you must be crazy. Look what he paid for that car. Look what he paid for that. He's out of his mind. Must be a Peruvian drug dealer. There's no possibility that car could be worth that kind of money. Okay, so that's historical fact. Now we go back to last year. Now we're here in this year, and everybody is in the same boat. Well, we need cars. We need cars. We need cars. Good. So stop and think about it, right? There's not going to be any cars. This causes, I'm going to call it like a tsunami effect. That's the tsunami bell going off. We already had tsunamis, and we know what happens to tsunamis. Everything in its path gets wiped out. You follow me? So now we have a tsunami warning. It's out 300 miles in the ocean, and when it starts banging, got to get off the beach, got to get out of and get up on a hillside somewhere, right? That's called the panic attack of the tsunami effect, right? Panic, panic, panic. Nobody wants to get washed away and all their goods, and the property and the clothesline and all the rest of it's all gone. Okay. In this case, the warning of the tsunami is no more chips. Chips ended, and everybody forgot about how making chips are no more chips, and now you can't make nothing. The only guy that can do it is that one, and therefore they have enough cars for 30 minutes. And now you got to panic. It's called a panic thing. Now we got to talk about cheap cars. What's the definition of a cheap car? And the pontificate. Oh my God! You see what that brought? What's he going to do with that car? What's he? I'll tell you exactly what he's going to do with it. He's going to sell the bitch. He's going to set it. That's what he's going to do. Because if you ain't got them, you can't sell them. Now, that doesn't mean you just bump your head and say, well, geez, they'll bring a lot of money. I don't want to know nothing about the car. Let me go bang my head and tell the boss I had to pay that much. No, that ain't the or you're a dealer with your own cash buying a car, and you're saying, well, geez, I just got to buy the car because if I don't buy the car, no. I would say, let's think about cheap cars, right? Defining a cheap car, I guess it would be something like, it seems like it's way under the market compared to some other reference, some other satellite dish information that you're comparing it to, right? That means that somebody did that and you thought that and you saw it there, it's on their auction report, you even watched them bidding on it and it was that. But you have to dig in a little bit deeper, what the characteristics are, not what the class is, not when we're saying pontificators talk about the sector's up 1.2%, it's a record, it's up 1/2% of a percent. When you put that into play, what's that got to do with a car that you're buying? It's cheaper, it's not cheaper. You shouldn't buy it because it's too much money and it's not cheap enough and all the rest of it, right? 1.2%, the truck market's up and it's this and what's that mean to a trader? Somebody who's got their family jewels on the line when they're getting ready to say, "I'll take that sucker." You follow me? You got to think about this, and it's more exaggerated now than I've ever seen it in my lifetime. Where your normal references, I like to use the satellite dish reference. You can't really, navigation doesn't work without 3 satellite beaming in, because if you only have 2, you can only go for sure you're correct north or south. You got to have the third one to know you're north, south, east, or west, right? So now when you get 4 or 5 beaming in, to a gnat's rear end, you can actually go right down the chimney scope with the bomb, right? So taking, let's call it various references to, what we've always used in our brain now in technology, and in particular in our tool, you can actually take all of these items without having to call somebody and say, "Hey, what do you think this one's worth?" You follow me? And narrow it down to a gnat's rear end, what the car's worth, and then put your last little piece in. It's called common sense, or let's call it Dr. Planck's words, it's not chauffeur knowledge, it's deep knowledge of, something you can't really quantify in a platform. It's called common sense, right? It's called skin in the game common sense. But once you have all the navigation satellite pieces coming into you, that little tiny last little tweak of common sense, skin in the game type common sense, enables you to make the smartest decisions. And that refers back to, what's a cheap car? Well, it's cheap not because you did it as the sector's up, I think I'll buy these, because no, then you're actually loading the gun with 3 rounds in a 6-shooter and pulling triggers. It's called, like suicide attempts, right? It's Russian roulette. But when we go to, let's say, what's cheap relative to the satellite dishes today, sucking in the information, understanding circumstances, right? And understanding when a car is cheap or not based on availability, right? And your particular circumstances, right? If you don't have cars, it really is physically impossible to sell them. It really is, I swear to God, right? This is why I think it's brilliant what Carvana is doing, selling other dealers' cars. It's brilliant. They don't have to worry about sourcing. They don't have to worry about depreciation. They don't have to worry about cleaning. They don't have to worry about certification, because all of the above have been, and therefore when we say, well, geez, how can they sell them for a profit? Well, it's easy to sell them for a profit when you don't have to source, you don't have to clean, you don't have to recondition, you don't have to guarantee. You just finance, insure, and deliver, right? So even though it's expensive, it's cheap as hell. They're giving back X amount of money to the dealer that's holding the car and doing all the rest. And signing the contract, we'll sell out your inventory for you. You don't have to pay any commissions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden, what's cheap? What's expensive, right? If you can sell something, I'm going to make a reference to what happens not just once in a while, but constantly. We sell cars, and guys, today they message this or that. Geez, there was that. I could have used that car. How much do you want for that one, right? That brought a lot of money, and so forth, right? And a guy or met multiple people on a daily basis. Jesus, holy Christmas, There's nothing cheap that you're selling except the one that we bought and paid too much for was the first one that got sold coming off the truck. Now then you got to ask the question, was it expensive or was it cheap? Was it cheap? Did you find a dumbass to go out and pinch it, get it ready, sell it to you, and then theoretically pontificate or say, oh my God, they brought too much money. But the next thing you know, it disappears. So what, Sean, would you say that was too much money or was it cheap? Because you had one and you got it with no ag, right? And you got it with a guarantee that if you don't like it, you're not allowed to have it. And then all of a sudden it disappears, right? So from my perspective, and it's really a weird perspective because in my case, it's happened to me for many decades where a dealer says, I pay way too much money for your cars. The immediate response is, then what are you doing here? Why are you doing this again? I don't want you hurting yourself. Please don't hurt yourself. Put a helmet on. Go somewhere else to buy cheap cars, cheap ones. But the cheap ones that don't sell might not be cheap. They become extraordinarily expensive. Because if you can't sell them, you look like a dumbass with a P number that didn't get sold. Those P numbers are really weird. Everybody knows that a P number you can only pick up service and finance on because, you paid too much for them. But then the question becomes, did you actually buy something that was cheap or something that was cheap? Because if you bought something that was cheap, it means it's mud that, say, for instance, you don't really have direction, history with, or understanding the pedigree of it to really be able to sell it right away because it becomes the most desirable car amongst all other cheap cars or too much money. P numbers. When you stop about that P number as opposed to an A number, right? 2322A, it's a trade. 2222B, it's a trade on a trade, right? A P number is one that you went out and pinched. Could be from any marketplace, right? Could be some people do it with their off-lease stuff, whatever. And then all of a sudden you're looking at it and say, well, these P numbers suck. Well, they could, but they might not. Because if you're buying, I would say, expensive cars that get sold right away, the definition has to be revised to, was it expensive or was it cheap? So you're going to look, where you're going to go today, how you're going to spend your time, where you're looking at this marketplace and that marketplace and the other marketplace, 14 other marketplaces, right, to find good buys, cheap cars, cars that are really worth the candy, right? From my perspective, the word cheap car has got to be exact. Now, if you bought a cheap car and it's white, it's chromed up, and it's standing like it's not actually touching the ground because it's hoovering, because the bit's so good looking, it's like standing up in the air, it floats around and so forth. And not only that, it requires double takes. A double take is you walk past it, you can't even help yourself. It's kind of like looking at the opposite gender. Walk and you take a double take. In other words, a double take on something that is hoovering, right, is a normal thing. And if you think that you are the only one that had the attraction to do a double take on that particular unit, it's a brain fart because it's not true. It's when people say there is no emotionality in buying and selling cars. No. You've lost your mind. You've completely gone into cloud cuckoo land. There is no emotional relationship to a VIN. No, you're wrong. And that's how you could wind up buying cheap cars that are really expensive, really, really expensive, because there ain't no double take effect. So double take takes different formats. It means that in your market, you're not really selling cars, you're only selling credit. Okay. So that means it's a book thing that makes it a cheap car, right? It could be way more expensive than a normal car, but because it fits the book perfectly, that's your cheap car, right? Because you're not really selling cars, you're selling finance. And there's a percentage of people that do that. But then there's another percentage of people, right? And a large percentage that whether they like it or not, and I know it's politically incorrect to refer to what I referred to, but the fact is the double take factor. If you ain't doing a double take, you're talking about a silver Malibu with no gear. That's a non-double take, no matter what happens in a million years in a desert island, and there's no water in other words, there's no double take there. Now you're in the middle of mudland, and you're never going. I don't care what you pay for that unit; it ain't cheap. You follow me? Because you're a row house in the middle of a city of row houses that ain't got nothing to do with getting a salesman pumped or getting anybody else pumped, let alone a customer doing a double take. You see what I'm saying to you? You got to picture it for a second, right? If you lined up everything in a regardless of the forum, in a parade ground, online, and you just took a double, like a general look. What ones, from an AI standpoint with Google, which ones get the most cursor traffic? Double take units or not? And then when they're expensive, are they expensive or are they cheap? See, in other words, if you could do your heat thing with their cursor and so forth, and now everybody's doing it, and all the listing sites are telling you what the things are, and AI is with Google, they know who does what. And now you Google words, and yeah, I got it. And the truth of the matter is, it's kind of like the 1-6 relationship with art, right, or with architecture. It's what causes people to look at certain things and say that's attractive, right? 1-6, right? Like architects from the Middle Ages, 1-6, the relationship. Therefore, it becomes like a physically attractive thing. It's what we do with faces. Why some are attractive, others aren't. It's because of asymmetry. Asymmetry is based on something that is not naturally attractive to a human eyeball. You follow me? Well, not to sound like a pontificator. The truth of the matter is, if you got an eye for a car and understand, and anybody has or doesn't have, it's not something you can learn, right? In other words, where you can actually zone in on something with a little bit of, let's call it symmetry, or let's say attractiveness, right? And then try to assign a word to it, like cheap or expensive, too much money. I paid too much money for that unit. You easily could have, if the symmetry of that unit doesn't fit your demographic of customer or the general demographic when you're listing something where they do a double take. It's a double take. Am I nuts, Shawnee? Are you missing the point here, or does it make any kind of is it registering in your common sense of what we're referring to?
I like it, Ted. No, it makes sense. The double take factor, it's got to be right
the double
there.
Take.
But, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think
from my perspective,
fantastic.
Let me just give you one last little piece here. When we were children buying cars, right, and, at the end of the day, you'd group them up, right, and you'd say, here we are in Darlington, South Carolina, Clanton's Auto Auction, and you bought 3 truckloads, and, you're looking at them, and is Ronnie Northcutt going to be able to get them there for tomorrow's auction in Pennsylvania? Okay. But when you're grouping them babies together, which ones you want on the first truck, right? You know how that happened, my friend? It's based on a double take. And then when you look back at, in them days it was a 7-car carrier or whatever, right? And you're looking at them and saying, God damn, you got a pretty good eye for a car. Looks like you paid too much for some of these units. But you know what they do? They require a double take. There's that little Tupperware wagon, but it's got wires and it's got the thing, right? So it's a double take deal, isn't it? And it's a little crisper inside than something else. It's a double take unit. You didn't pay too much. You paid cheap money. It's cheap because by the time it gets to the block on Friday, and there's never a no sale, and that baby clips off X, Y, or Z. Was it expensive or was it cheap? Even though it's top of the sheet, and all the rest that follows. It's exactly the same thing what's happening in the marketplace today when people are saying, well, I got to have cars and I don't have any cars and I got to pay too much and I got to just bear in mind what's cheap and what ain't cheap with, in other words, I would call it the double take effect of, is it attractive? Is it a 1-6 relationship? Is it something that actually will cause the exact same emotion to a random consumer that it caused to you to do the double take? Probably insane for the average person to listen to this, but I would say if there is any science related to what we do for a living, separate from pontification of listening to, well, a category is down 4%. It's highest in category of the year, of the 2 years in history, and so forth. That ain't helping nobody understand the wheres and whys. That's kind of like chauffeur knowledge. The chauffeur listened to it long enough he could actually repeat it like a parrot, but really know how fundamental understanding of where that information is coming from. Chauffeur. It's a guy that listened for a long time. Now he can repeat it like a parrot. 1.3% orange. How's that translate into a trader's world? You follow me? I don't know. It's cheap, expensive,
Thanks for listening. For more information on our products, visit Accu-Trade.com. That's Accu-Trade.com.